welcome everyone to day 3 of INACSL 2022 here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We have to make sure we say it correctly. So my name is Lance. I'm the founder CEO of HealthySimulation.com. So excited to be having an opportunity, invited out by the INACSL leadership to help to support the new Sim Media Center, and conversations with experts, with leadership of the organization, taking a deeper dive into some of the key areas of INACSL, the organization, and the event taking place here today. Not only for those who perhaps are overseas and could not participate in the event here today, but also for those that are off doing other exciting things. We wanted to try to capture some of the excitement of the things happening here on the exhibit room floor, as well as talking to the leadership. So with me, I have to my left, Joy Jacobs, who is the VP of North American Sales at GigXR. And next to her, we have Dr. Rivera, who is the founder and CEO of SimX. And so here we have clearly a panel that represents both, the summary of XR technologies, both with augmented reality with GigXR and virtual reality with SimX, which I know has dabbled a little bit as well in augmented reality. On a session here, we're going to be talking today about the impacts of XR from the past of what's going on in the past 2 years to what are we going to be looking like in the future. And I think this is a really important area for all of us to consider for a specific reason. None other than that, learners will start to judge our clinical educational programs based on the types of technologies, that we bring into the space. And so you can imagine a learner, and I might date us all here a little bit, but the first iPhone came out in 2007. So that would put those learners at 17 years old. So they're just about ready to start their professional educational pathway into healthcare. And they're going to certainly take a look at one, nursing program versus another and say, hey, these folks have, advanced clinical simulation labs and XR technologies for really, providing advanced level of training. And meanwhile, this other institution has none of that, right? So that will become a draw for learners, especially who are digital natives, right, in this sense. And so today I'd love to talk to you both about a little bit about what's happened over the past 2 years. Let's get started with that and the impact of COVID for, what you've seen as vendors in the space, helping the community to overcome those challenges with your unique technology. So what's the chaos been like for what you guys have seen at GigXR, Joy?
So it's interesting. We moved our headquarters from the UK to Los Angeles in December of 2019. And so you talk about timing, it just was
great timing, perfect timing.
It was, yeah. And so with that, what we found is, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand were severely locked down. And their lockdown extended a long period of time, way longer than all of us experienced. But what they've done is embrace that technology and have their students doing the remote, but also as they can bring them in person and really experiencing the HoloLens to its max. So that's where a lot of our data points have come from.
Wow.
Is the remote, no geographical boundaries. You don't have to be near a computer. You don't have to be in a sim lab. You can actually do an immersive simulation experience in your living room.
Right.
And so, like I said, a lot of our data points have come from these countries. So we made lemonade out of lemons. And now what we're finding is we're getting a lot of momentum in the North America market as, schools are becoming, they're now wanting to get back to where they were in a safe place and do a hybridized approach to learning. And so with the HoloLens, in our applications, you're able to absolutely have the best of both worlds. You have their cake and eat it too. You can have a remote and also bring in folks as it's safe for them to be together.
Right.
And so anyway, it's really amazing to me as we engage with our counterparts across the pond, so to say, that how they have excelled in this. Like, this is no new news to them, whereas now it's just starting to get traction in the U.S. market and Canadian market. This concept, and so
what's unique, I would think, about something like augmented reality is you're right. Like, we could have a patient literally sitting here right next to us right now, and we could walk around that patient. And what's special, I think, about GigXR and some of the technologies that they have is that there's screen-based utilization too. So we could use our phones to do this type of work, right? So the barrier for the more expensive HoloLens headset, which is more of a significant investment than some of the virtual reality headsets that are out there because of the technology. But we don't have to be forced or tied to just that device, right? That piece of hardware. And so, doing these things in your living room does not necessarily also require, this giant headset.
The headset nor the PC tower.
Right.
You're not immersed and cut off from reality.
Right.
You can see your reality and you can bring that into your reality.
Right.
And
obviously the headset offers the highest levels of fidelity, which
yes.
really is fantastic. It's a really unique thing. If you haven't had a chance to put on either an augmented reality headset or a virtual reality headset recently, you need to do that. You need to see how advanced these technologies have really become because it's remarkable.
Absolutely. And through the lens of your camera, you can still have that 3D spatial awareness.
Right.
So it's not just a digital, I'm just seeing this patient, the front of the patient
right.
on
it's not
my
2D.
tablet.
It's like volumetric and 3D.
You
kind of
walk
walking
around it just like
right.
you would a normal patient.
Awesome.
But in virtual reality, the same. Like with the technology, I always think of VR back in the day when my nephew first started gaming.
Right.
And that was all clunky and everything. So all of
us
that were
desktops on our head.
Some of us were raised
to
in
have
that.
support beams for the whole computer server room back behind with 40,000 cables. We're way past that, right? And
Big
I think
time.
there's still an imagination for some that virtual reality is this clunky, matrix-like thing.
Right.
But no, it's really dramatic how powerful these tools are, and especially a lot of the wireless headsets that I know SimX kind of has on its platform. So Ryan, tell me a little bit about what's been going on for you guys in the past 2 years with COVID and kind of what you've been seeing from the community.
Right. No, I think that's an excellent question. I mean, for us, frankly, probably 80+% of our customers have come during the pandemic, right?
Incredible.
So I think that just tells you how much it drove adoption. And I think there were a couple reasons for that. One was, as was already mentioned, I mean, sim centers were shut down. And so people are looking for a way to continue to train with simulation. And a lot of clinical experiences were shut down too for trainees.
Right.
And so they needed to maintain those skills. And there weren't that many options available to them, right? You can't really social distance in a traditional sim center context. And so, our product allows you to join via the internet and work together around virtual patients, even if you are at home. And so a lot of our customers were doing that. They were having students check out headsets, take them home, join together over the internet. Their instructor is also joining together over the internet, and they're able to debrief remotely and all that kind of stuff. And so that was a huge boon, I think. I mean, frankly, for us from a business perspective and for our customers to be able to continue their sim. But I think, the other thing that I didn't really expect that was really valuable is, one of the benefits of VR is that these cases are virtualized. And so it makes it easy for you to share them from person to person.
Right.
So like at the beginning of the pandemic, we made some COVID training cases. I happened to be working clinically at Stanford in Santa Clara County, which is one of the big early surge areas. A lot of our other docs were in Washington where things were surging early. And so, here we were 2 months into the pandemic, releasing cases that describe how to properly triage a COVID patient, how to treat a COVID patient based on what we knew then at that time. And we released those for free on the internet. Over 400 institutions downloaded that within the first month.
Right.
And that ability to just rapidly disseminate information and training tools is really powerful. And that would be very hard to do with any other type of technology.
Right. I've seen a couple of videos from Ukraine right now where they are training soldiers with virtual reality for Stinger missile deployment. And so it's, that rapid deployment in any case scenario, it's crazy about how quickly you can utilize those tools to meet the challenges at hand. And likewise in the pandemic, a lot of people were struggling to provide or get access to this type of content. And here's a way to really provide high fidelity experiences. And that's what I think is so unique about the technology that I don't quite think everyone has really fully wrapped their head around yet is that you could be in the back of an ambulance doing CPR in 1 minute, you flip a switch, now you're on the face of Mars performing surgery, right? And so that flexibility of bringing in a digital component really adds a whole new layer to the learning pyramid on our way up to the apex of our highest fidelity simulation experiences. And don't get me wrong, there's no way we're replacing mannequin simulation with just XR technologies. These things complement one another. We're still, very hands-on profession, right? We need to interact with people and practice that communication in real time. Those are things we're going to have to continue to do. If anything, we're going to have to expand upon them. But these new layers provide us with this remote, 24/7 access, digital libraries that continually are expanding, technology that is in a sense, Moore's law. We're exponential with regards to our
Yeah,
processing
absolutely.
power. So the affordability of these things is really going to be remarkable in the future. And I think the flexibility of the type of content that we can bring to the table is going to be remarkable. So, all right, COVID, we're sort of over it. We're sort of not. We're in some kind of weird place,
Right.
Purgatory of whatever this is.
Right.
And so, we've got more to deal with that. But let's talk for a moment about shift to the future and really about what do we see the landscape looking like. I've kind of alluded to it a little bit here about where I think some of the hardware will go because it's supported by groups like Sony and Facebook and Microsoft, right? Big corporations, global corporations building the hardware. So Joy, tell me a little bit about, from your nursing background and experience and working with nurses so much, how do you see XR technologies in the future making an impact with regards to education and training?
So I was reading an article the other day, and it was saying that post-pandemic, even now that we're back in person, that our graduates, our nurses that graduated during COVID and after, their confidence and competence in clinical reasoning, which clinical reasoning makes or breaks the patient's successful outcome
Sure.
or negative outcome. And their confidence or competence in that is about 20 to 25%.
Wow.
So that's a bit scary
Yeah.
as all of us think about our
Right.
loved ones going to the hospital,
Right.
or being treated.
Right. Just
So
a little bit of a lack of opportunity to practice those skills,
Absolutely.
right? Certainly.
So with VR and AR, you get that realistic. So with our volumetrically captured patients, they are real standardized patient actors,
right.
and they're volumetrically captured.
Right, which means that basically we've got cameras around them
Everywhere.
all the way, right? So it's not a 2D video like you're normally accustomed
Exactly.
Right.
And you're not watching it on a screen, you're engaging with it. It's right in front of you. So you're seeing, for instance, anaphylaxis. A gentleman go from being confident that he just fell off his mountain bike, he's got a laceration that was sutured, he had a shot of penicillin, and now he starts having an allergic reaction to
to.
it. And it's not immediate. You can see that, and that empathetic approach, that bedside manner that you want everyone to have, whatever discipline it is, you can truly gauge your students in that, and their therapeutic communication and their empathy, but more importantly, start that safe to fail clinical reasoning development.
Right.
And with AR and VR, we're able to do that, and in any environment.
Right.
And the beautiful thing is, like you said, the mannequins aren't going away.
Right.
But how amazing is it if you could be wearing a HoloLens, and instead of moulaging your sim man
Right.
to bleeding and to having a PIC line or a central line, or being someone going an oncology patient going through chemo, you can actually overlay an augmented patient with the HoloLens and give that absolute patient idea to your students.
Right. And so now we're blending the technologies even further. We're utilizing the mannequin and then adding the graphic kind of overlay afterwards through the augmented reality headset. And so, this extended reality that can come only from blending these technologies, I think is quite remarkable. Because, let's face it, right? There are some things that XR technology right now actually is doing a better job of doing than some of the mannequins. And let me give you a case, an example. Let me act as the voice of the patient. Yes, sir, I'm feeling very good. There's no motion in the face.
None.
There's no real interaction in terms of a real professional communication opportunity.
Exactly.
And so, this is part of what XR is filling a kind of a gap in terms of the specific mannequins. Now, listen, they were started with anesthesiologists, and
Right.
so the patient lying flat on their back was kind of pretty much where we needed to be most of the time. But the realism of nursing is that a patient is not lying back and barely able to speak most of the time, right? There's a lot of engagement with them, and so here's a way to kind of augment that and complement it further. So Ryan, tell me, from virtual reality perspective, which I think is really exciting about the things that are going to be happening in that space. Tell me what you think the future holds for education and training.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple ways in which VR is going to have a big impact on what we're able to train. Like, one is the ability to really dynamically alter your environment, right? So that's something that VR, I think, of the XR technology uniquely brings, right, is that it encompasses you in a virtual world. So we have scenarios that take place like on the top of Everest, or in a moving transport helicopter, or you're pulling someone out of a burning car and resuscitating them on the ground. Right? But it's not just about those kind of like esoteric environments. I'm an emergency medicine doctor, and the hard part of doing my job is not just remembering my algorithms, but doing that while you are in the chaos of a trauma bay,
Right.
and you've got the family there screaming at you about what's happening next.
Right.
And there's 15 people in the room all going around.
Right.
So being able to replicate that, I think, is really going
Right.
to help our trainees
Right.
be able to adapt to the real world, right?
Right.
This is not just a sterile sim room where you're focusing on one thing. That's not what it's like in real life.
Right.
So I think that's a big part of it.
The environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's hard to replicate when we're talking about, unless we're doing an MCI or a big simulation experience, which is going to be expensive and it's going to require a lot of planning.
Intensive.
Very important to do, should be done. But at the same time, how we could do this 24/7 if we needed to, right? In
Exactly,
the virtual
10
space.
times a day.
Mhm.
But really, I think the biggest power is in freeing us from the confines of the sim center, and that's true of AR, VR, XR, right? Because in my view, the biggest problem now is that we don't sim enough, right? If we want to make the
Agreed.
kind of transition that the airline industry did in the 1950s, 60s,
Yeah.
where they went from flying in a plane being a relatively scary thing to now we all know it is safer to fly than it is to drive to the airport, right?
Right.
And they did that through high volume of high quality simulation.
Right.
But because we have, right now current technologies require you to house everything in a fancy sim center, and you have to build a fake hospital room around it, and it makes sim something that is rare. Something that you have to schedule ahead of time and do, every other week or every quarter or something like
Right.
that. So
it's a question of resources, right?
Right.
And so when we think about the costs involved with the simulation program, again, they're warranted, they're meaningful, but now we can extend out further beyond that with the investments into XR technologies to take them even further.
And like ultimately, I've said this a few times, and I think this is really true. Every generation of medicine looks back on the one before and says, "Oh, that was so barbaric. How could they have put leeches on people? How could they have done all these things?" And you always wonder, what is that going to be for us? And I think what it's going to be is they will look back and say, how could you have practiced on real people? Like, how could you have released people into the wild, having just done a couple pokes on an IV and let them just dig around in somebody's arm?
Right.
And I think by drastically increasing our utilization of simulation, that will be a thing of the past.
Right.
And people, once you approach a real patient, you will have had 1,000 reps of what it is that you're doing. And so that is really, I think, the big shift that's going to happen from these technologies.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, and so that affordability, I think, is part of the equation. And again, Moore's Law, we're talking about exponential computer power. And so, look at our phones, right? Just over the past 10 years about where smartphones have come from. Again, 2007, the first iPhone came out. And so, here we are, what is that, about 20, almost, 15 to 20 years later-ish. And we're seeing massive advancements in terms of the types of computer technology that we are all walking around with all day long. This is what's coming to XR, right? We're just on the footsteps of this pyramid of XR technology, I think, for the first time ever, because again of these external corporations, global corporations developing the hardware, which I think in the past was really, individual groups were trying to create these hardware components and they didn't have it at the scale that they needed to, right? So certainly, having seen the goals of Microsoft with the HoloLens and a lot of XR companies, they feel like the best place to get started is in the B2B space, right? And healthcare being more of a B2B in a sense that we're talking in institutional wide utilization opportunities for training and utilization. Tell me a little bit about each of your kind of reflections on XR for utilization of medical devices, components in the sim lab room with regards to the technology specific perhaps to the institution, and bringing those into the live simulation environment. Can you talk to me a little bit about that and your experience there?
So in our Holo scenarios, we have a full simulation environment of hospital room. You've got your airway card, you've got your ultrasound machine, you've got every diagnostic that you need to completely treat or diagnose this patient. And the beautiful thing is, back in the day when I was designing sim centers, I'm dating myself, when we first started doing this and we had to plumb in compressed air and nobody had heard of having a compressor to run your simulator. We never thought of expanding our space in that regard. And then we got into reselling refurbished equipment. And before you knew it, the capital budget was taken by all these diagnostics that you might use in one or two simulations.
Right.
Well, now with VR, AR, you can have that ultrasound machine. The muscle memory that you need your learners to have when they're in a tight situation, the bells and whistles are going off, and they need to remember, okay, A, B, C, D, E, and I need this ultrasound machine, I need this airway cart, I need this, and you're able to create that environment with minimal expense.
Right.
And it looks realistic. You can format it to whatever it is that your hospital uses. Or
Right.
what
So
your
once we
protocol
develop
is.
that specific tool, in a sense, or device, whatever it is, or that cart, we bring that in. It's like copy pasting, right? Like
yeah.
you want it or you don't want it. Delete, turn on, turn off. And so all of a sudden, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of medical device equipment are easily available for you to utilize and train. Again, remote, 24/7 distance, wherever you need them to be, right? They're really available.
Absolutely. And
to
we're
you.
not looking for your technique. We're looking that you're prioritizing, that you're identifying that you need these diagnostics and you need them in this order to
Right.
treat this patient.
Right. So let's evolve that from the device. Let's talk about IPE from that, right? So if we can bring in any type of technology into the space, what about people and the ability to coordinate, right? So talk to me a little bit about that, Ryan. And I know SimX has a lot of things with IPE opportunities.
Yeah.
Tell me more about, how can we bring people who really aren't there, and how do we bring in people from all over the world so that we can do training together?
Yeah, that's one of the huge benefits, I feel like, of XR technologies. And we have ACLS and PALS and ATLS and NRP, like mega code scenarios and mass casualty scenarios. And those are ones where I think there is a lot of opportunity to do interprofessional education because, you don't treat patients as an individual, you treat them as a team. And so it's really critical, I think, to practice in those environments. And I think this does build off of what we were just talking about. I mean, the fact that you can have a functioning ventilator and a functioning Pyxis and all of the functioning central line kit and all of those things relatively easily in VR means that you can have a doctor at home and a nurse at home and a respiratory therapist in the empty room of a hospital and your instructor, at the sim center. And you can all join together in the same virtual scenario and work together and practice your skills. And I think that's increasingly important in the pandemic affected world where the ability to come in person is not always present, right? But you're going to have to treat patients together in person. And, it's not exactly the same, but it's pretty close to be able to join together in the virtual world and practice those skills. It also ends up being very useful for, our nursing customers who have multiple campuses. A lot of institutions have this kind of spoken hub model where they have like a centralized campus and some outlying campuses or training sites.
Right.
And the olden days of simulationists throwing mannequins in the back of their car and driving them 2 hours to a facility. I mean, that's a lot of pain. But now they can just put a few headsets at each site.
Right.
They can log in and they can all join together.
Right.
And that
all of a sudden campuses across the region can come together, learners can come together and participate in a learning experience.
Well, I'll tell you
and
what.
get a standardized training opportunity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a key.
That's massive, I think.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you one other kind of shade of that I think is really powerful is that you can directly learn from experts across the world, right? So you can have people who are, trauma experts deployed in Afghanistan, like dealing with, trauma every day, running simulations for people, in Iowa who are going to, be deploying sometime soon or going out. You can have people who are experts in tropical medicine who live in the tropics, training people all across the country. So I think there's a lot of power in that as well.
Right. And just to touch finally on that standardization part, even within a single clinical faculty group, you can have different ways of approaching things. And this becomes kind of at times overwhelming for the learner. But I think the worst part about that is that the outcomes that we're receiving from simulation can get disjointed if we don't have a standard protocol. And I have heard of very successful simulation processes for a single hospital that did extremely well with, reducing infection or improving rates of CPR, what have you, resuscitation, and then those being trying to transfer to another institution, and they don't work. It does, because it doesn't have that oversight from those individuals that are passionate and champions for it. Well, if they can create that in the digital space and then just send out the digital opportunities, which are, could be modified, endlessly, but that we have some structure to it. There's some standardization there. So let's touch finally on that point. Talk to me a little bit about standardization and why that's so important and why XR provides that opportunity.
Absolutely. You want to offer that continuity, that they're seeing the same thing. Everybody is seeing the same patient. That way, there's that unbiased evaluation. And I mean, in nursing school, we didn't have that opportunity. If you weren't in with the instructors, you had some bias against you. But you have that unbiased evaluation.
Sure.
And
Which is like what standardized patients are supposed to be.
Absolutely.
And mostly usually are, right? But again, hard to replicate that.
absolutely. And so that with that continuity and offering that in your curriculum and in those experiences for your students, that is key for to measure their success, but more importantly to see how they're growing and how they're going to be effective in the real world. And we're, like I said, we're not trying to replace patient sims, but this offers an augmentation to enhancing that entire simulation. We've raised the bar, we've raised the ceiling, we've opened the ceiling
Right.
of this, and it's offered so much more in how you can standardize in every part of your curriculum. When students are auscultating, for instance, valves, they don't realize the importance of right away those landmarks where you're doing that valve auscultation and a cardiac assessment. You can actually see in the anatomy and hollow human, for instance, you can see the full anatomy and see exactly why it's important to be in those landmarks and peer in and look at those valves and see, oh, okay, in that intercostal space near the sternal border, I can see the aortic valve. And that's why I'm auscultating here. So that standardization of why you're doing what you're doing and how it can produce the same result if it's done right, that is key.
Right.
And so we're offering more standardization, not just in clinic, but in anatomy and everything as to why you're treating this patient as a whole human being and everything that you're doing as far as intervention, procedures, and empathetic approach, therapeutic communication,
Right.
all of that.
All of that can be
You can standardize all of that now,
Right.
not just a stoic mannequin laying there, like you said,
Right.
with no expression.
Right. Ryan,
Just
your
vital
thoughts on
sign changes.
Right. And Ryan, your thoughts on
Yeah, this is really critical. My career prior to SimX was in quality improvement and patient safety for like CMS and AHRQ, and I mean the evidence is overwhelming that like standard work and things like that drastically improve patient safety. So I think that is critical.
like checklists in aviation, right?
Yeah, yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
If we have an emergency,
Exactly.
what does the book say?
Right.
We've already thought through this.
Yeah.
Let's just do what we're told to do at this moment.
And I think actually XR tools are uniquely positioned to help us achieve a much higher level of standardization because they measure so much. I mean, one of the things that's
a
great,
really good point.
right, is like for our scenarios, it will print out afterwards a debrief report that will tell you what you did well and what you did poorly, but also timestamps of everything that happened in the scenario. So you can be like, hey, you didn't put them on the monitor until minute 6, and they're tacking away at 140 that entire time. Right. And some of the upcoming technology is even more exciting. So there are headsets that are going to be released soon that have eye tracking. So you can imagine, you could say, hey, you're only looking your patient in the eyes 45% of the time when you're talking to them, and average for your level of training is 76.
Wow.
So what's going on?
Yeah.
Right. Or there are headsets coming out that will have biometric sensors built into them. That's going to let you measure the physiologic stress levels of your students.
Right.
Some of our customers are already doing that with the third-party biometric sensors, and that is so powerful because if somebody is too stressed, they're freaking out, they're not learning. If they're not stressed enough, then you're clearly not pushing them. And so they are working to modify the scenario in real time to keep you in that sweet spot of physiologic stress. And then we're talking about training our medical trainees like we're training Olympic athletes, right? Where you see them running on the treadmill with all these sensors coming off, staying in the sweet spot 100% of the time. And I feel like that's what these technologies are going to let us do with medical training, and that is really exciting.
Right. Wow. That's an angle on standardization that I'd not thought about, but I think makes a lot of sense. It's certainly something that we should be considering too. Well, thank you so much for your time today, for sharing a little bit more about XR, the past, the present, the future, and what we think we're going to be going. I'm really excited for the technology. I think that it's going to continue to act as a catalyst to bringing more people into the concept of simulation on a greater scale, right? Because again, the affordability, the flexibility, and the dynamic range of things that it can do and offer us, it's an extension of the reality of simulation that we want to try to portray. And so it's so exciting for your companies, the work that you're doing, and I'm really excited to continue to see what's to come. So with that, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. We'll see you all at the next one.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you.